November 1938. Salisbury Hall, Hertfordshire, England. Geoffrey de Havilland sat in his office, staring at design sketches that every aviation expert in Britain had already dismissed as impossible. A bomber made almost entirely of wood. No defensive armament. No gun turrets. Just speed. The establishment's reaction had been immediate and unanimous. Laughable. Preposterous. A death trap. Britain's Air Ministry wanted heavily armored bombers bristling with gun turrets, slow formations protected by layers of defensive firepower. That was modern air warfare. That was reality. De Havilland's concept violated every principle the Royal Air Force had built its bombing doctrine around. But de Havilland wasn't proposing nostalgia or regression. He was proposing revolution. Wood, he argued, offered advantages metal could not match. It was abundant in Britain, requiring no strategic materials like aluminum that were already in desperately short supply. It could be worked by furniture manufacturers and piano makers, spreading production beyond overcrowded aircraft factories. It was light, reducing weight and increasing speed. And speed, de Havilland insisted, was better defense than any gun turret. A wooden aircraft fast enough to outrun enemy fighters wouldn't need defensive armament. It wouldn't need heavy armor plate. It could carry its bomb load deeper into enemy territory, deliver it accurately, and escape before interceptors could react. The weight saved from guns and gunners would extend range and increase payload. It was elegant theory. Every Air Force professional in Britain thought it was fantasy. The Air Ministry's response came in January 1939. Rejected. Britain needed proven designs, conventional bombers with established performance characteristics. The coming war would be fought with metal aircraft and massed formations. There was no room for experimental wooden planes. De Havilland persisted. He wrote letters. He revised proposals. He presented refined calculations showing how a wooden bomber could achieve speeds above 400 miles per hour, faster than any contemporary fighter. He demonstrated how simplified construction would accelerate production. The Air Ministry remained unmoved. Would belong to the previous war, not the coming one. Then Germany invaded Poland, and Britain's carefully constructed theories about air warfare began collapsing under contact with reality. The Luftwaffe was destroying bombers faster than British factories could replace them. Gun turrets provided inadequate defense against modern fighters. Heavily armored bombers were slow, making them easier targets. Losses mounted throughout 1939 and 1940. By December 1939, the Air Ministry's position had softened slightly. Not out of belief in de Havilland's design, but out of desperation. With metal aircraft production strained to its limits and bomber losses climbing, perhaps a wooden aircraft could serve as a fast reconnaissance plane. Not a bomber, that remained too radical, but a photo reconnaissance aircraft. Something expendable. The contract arrived at de Havilland's office on New Year's Eve, 1939. 50 reconnaissance aircraft. Wooden construction permitted. No defensive armament specified. It wasn't approval of de Havilland's vision. It was permission to build what the establishment still considered an obsolete compromise. But it was enough. Geoffrey de Havilland ordered his engineering team to begin work immediately. They would prove the skeptics wrong. They would build the fastest operational aircraft in the world. They would build the Mosquito. January 1940. Salisbury Hall. De Havilland's chief engineer, Charles Walker, stood in the experimental workshop surrounded by piano makers and furniture craftsmen. Not aircraft workers. Woodworkers. The Mosquito would be built using techniques refined over centuries of fine furniture construction, adapted for aircraft design. Balsa wood cores sandwiched between birch plywood, bonded with special adhesives under heat and pressure. The resulting structure would be lighter than aluminum and stronger than conventional wooden construction. This wasn't traditional aircraft carpentry. This was advanced composite engineering, decades ahead of its time, executed by men whose previous projects included Chippendale chairs and concert pianos. The first challenge was the adhesive. Traditional aircraft glues failed under the temperature and humidity variations aircraft experienced. De Havilland's team developed a new casein-based adhesive that remained flexible across extreme temperature ranges while providing exceptional bonding strength. The formula was so effective that wooden joints proved stronger than the wood itself. The second challenge was the monocoque fuselage, the egg-shaped body that would form the Mosquito's core. Unlike metal aircraft with internal frameworks, the Mosquito's fuselage would be its structure. Two curved plywood shells, precisely fitted together, bonded and reinforced with internal stringers. No rivets. No external fasteners. Smooth, aerodynamic, immensely strong. Former furniture workers learned to shape birch plywood over massive molds, creating compound curves with millimeter precision. Temperature and humidity had to be controlled exactly during bonding, too much heat degraded the adhesive, too little prevented proper curing. The process required patience and craftsmanship that couldn't be rushed. Production began slowly. Each fuselage took weeks to complete. Critics pointed to the sluggish manufacturing pace as proof that wooden aircraft were impractical for modern warfare. Metal bombers could be assembled in days. The Mosquito took months. De Havilland's engineers ignored the criticism and refined their processes. They were building aircraft differently, and different took time to perfect. The wings presented their own challenges. Conventional wooden aircraft used external bracing wires and internal spars for strength. The Mosquito's wings would be self-supporting structures, box-section spars running the full length, covered with stressed plywood that contributed to structural strength. No external bracing. No drag-inducing wires. By June 1940, the first Mosquito prototype stood nearly complete in the assembly hall. Painted bright yellow, the standard British color for prototype aircraft, it looked sleek and purposeful. The nose tapered smoothly to twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same powerplants that drove the Spitfire fighter. The cockpit sat high, providing excellent visibility. The fuselage flowed back in clean lines to a twin tail. It looked fast sitting still. The Air Ministry inspection team arrived in September 1940. Britain was fighting for survival. The Battle of Britain raged overhead. German bombers struck London nightly. Every aircraft, every pilot, every resource was desperately needed. The inspection team walked around the yellow prototype with unconcealed skepticism. Wood. No guns. 2 engines but only 2 crew. It violated everything they understood about bomber design. The performance specifications intrigued them, though. De Havilland claimed the Mosquito would reach 380 miles per hour, faster than the Spitfire Mki. That seemed impossible for a twin-engine bomber, but the calculations supported it. They authorized flight testing. Not because they believed the aircraft would work, but because Britain couldn't afford to ignore any potential weapon. November 25, 1940. De Havilland test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., the designer's son, climbed into the prototype's cockpit. He ran through pre-flight checks methodically. The Merlin engines caught, settled into their characteristic rumble. He released brakes and advanced throttles. The Mosquito accelerated smoothly down the grass runway at Hatfield Aerodrome, lighter than expected, responsive to controls. At 90 miles per hour, de Havilland eased back on the stick. The prototype lifted cleanly into gray November sky. Over the next hour, de Havilland explored the aircraft's handling characteristics. It flew beautifully, light on the controls, stable, responsive. He pushed the throttles forward, building speed. The Mosquito accelerated past 300 miles per hour. Then 350. Then 380. The airspeed indicator kept climbing. At 12,000 feet, in level flight, the prototype reached 392 miles per hour. Faster than any operational Spitfire. Faster than the German Bf 109E that was then terrorizing British bombers. De Havilland brought the prototype back to Hatfield and filed his report. The Mosquito wasn't just fast for a bomber. It was fast for a fighter. The Air Ministry reviewed the flight test data with growing interest. A bomber that could outrun German fighters wouldn't need defensive guns. It could operate alone, without formation protection. It could strike targets deep in occupied Europe and return safely. Maybe Geoffrey de Havilland hadn't been insane after all. Maybe wooden aircraft had a place in modern warfare. Maybe they'd been wrong. Spring 1941. RAF Benson, Oxfordshire. The first operational Mosquitoes arrived in British reconnaissance units painted in pale blue-grey camouflage. No unit markings. No squadron badges. These aircraft didn't officially exist. Number 1 Photographic Reconnaissance Unit received 4 Mosquitoes in July 1941 with orders to prove or disprove the wooden bomber concept under combat conditions. The unit's commander, Wing Commander Geoffrey Tuttle, studied the aircraft with professional interest. Fast, certainly. Beautiful to fly, according to ferry pilots. But unproven in combat. The Luftwaffe would provide the test. The first operational mission launched on September 17, 1941. Target, Bordeaux and La Pallice on the French Atlantic coast. Objective, photograph German naval facilities. The Mosquito, serial W4055, carried no bombs, just cameras mounted in the fuselage belly. 2 crew, pilot and navigator. No gunners because there were no guns. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant Alastair Taylor, climbed to 22,000 feet over the English Channel and set course for France. Below, German radar stations tracked the lone aircraft crossing the coast. Bf-109 fighters scrambled to intercept. Taylor spotted the fighters climbing toward him when they were still 5 miles distant. He opened the throttles fully. The Mosquito accelerated smoothly past 380 miles per hour. The German fighters couldn't match that speed at altitude. They pursued for 20 minutes, firing occasional long-range bursts that fell short, then gave up and returned to base. Taylor continued to Bordeaux unmolested, photographed the target, and returned to England. Flight time, 3 hours and 40 minutes. Film exposed, 240 frames. Combat damage, none. The reconnaissance missions continued through autumn 1941. Mosquitoes photographed German positions across occupied Europe, flying routes that would have been suicidal for slower aircraft. Fighters intercepted them regularly. None caught them. By December 1941, Mosquitoes had flown over 100 operational sorties without a single aircraft lost to enemy action. The skeptics were running out of arguments. But reconnaissance was only one mission. De Havilland had designed the Mosquito as a bomber, and the Air Ministry was finally ready to test that role. The bomber variant arrived in November 1941. Identical to the reconnaissance version except for one modification, a bomb bay carved into the fuselage, capable of carrying 4 500-pound bombs or one 4,000-pound blockbuster. Number 105 Squadron received the first bomber Mosquitoes in November 1941. Squadron leader Reggie Reynolds studied the aircraft with the calculating eye of a combat veteran. Fast, yes. But carrying 4 500-pound bombs into the heart of Germany with no defensive guns? That was either genius or suicide. The test would come soon enough. May 31, 1942. 4 Mosquitoes took off from RAF Horsham St. Faith on the squadron's first operational bombing mission. Target, Cologne. The massive 1,000-bomber raid had hit the city the previous night, and the Mosquitoes would strike in daylight, demonstrating that British bombers could attack Germany in broad daylight without fighter escort. Squadron leader Reynolds led the formation across the North Sea at low altitude, staying under German radar. Over Holland, he climbed to 24,000 feet and increased speed to 340 miles per hour. German fighters scrambled but couldn't reach the Mosquito's altitude before the bombers crossed into Germany. Over Cologne, Reynolds leveled out for the bomb run. The city was still burning from the previous night's attack. He released his 4 500-pound bombs into the smoke and banked away sharply. 2 Bf-109s attempted interception but couldn't match the Mosquito's speed in the turn. All 4 aircraft returned to England without damage. The mission proved the concept decisively. A fast, unarmed bomber could penetrate German air defenses, strike targets, and escape. The Air Ministry immediately ordered increased Mosquito production. But speed alone wasn't enough for the mission profile that would make the Mosquito legendary. For that, the aircraft needed one more capability, the ability to strike with precision at extremely low altitude. That capability came with the fighter-bomber variant. January 1943. RAF Hunsdon, Hertfordshire. Wing Commander Basil Embry stood on the flight line, watching Mosquitoes practice low-level approaches. Not 20,000 feet, 50 feet. Hedge-hopping across the English countryside at 300 miles per hour, threading between trees and power lines. This was the new mission, precision daylight strikes against specific industrial and military targets in occupied Europe. Not area bombing of cities, but surgical strikes on factories, headquarters buildings, railway junctions. Targets where accuracy mattered more than bomb weight. The Mosquito was perfect for this role. Fast enough to evade fighters, agile enough to navigate at low altitude, accurate enough to hit small targets. And wooden enough to be mass-produced without straining Britain's aluminum supply. By early 1943, Mosquito production had accelerated dramatically. The early manufacturing difficulties had been solved. Piano factories, furniture workshops, and small contractors across Britain were building Mosquito components. The aircraft that skeptics had called impossible to mass-produce was now coming off assembly lines faster than metal bombers. The low-level precision strikes began in earnest in 1943, and they were devastating. On January 30, 1943, 3 Mosquitoes struck Berlin in broad daylight, disrupting a speech by Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring with their bombs. The psychological impact was enormous. British wooden bombers were attacking the German capital at noon while Göring was assuring Nazi officials that Berlin was invulnerable. On March 3, 1943, Mosquitoes struck the Gestapo headquarters in Amsterdam, destroying the building's population registry section and allowing Dutch resistance fighters to escape execution. On April 26, 1943, Mosquitoes hit the Zeiss optical works in Jena, destroying precision lens manufacturing equipment critical for German bomb sights and submarine periscopes. Each strike followed the same pattern: low-level approach at maximum speed, bomb release from minimum altitude, immediate escape before fighters could react. The Mosquitoes would arrive without warning, destroy their targets with precision that heavy bombers couldn't match, and disappear before German defenses could respond effectively. The Luftwaffe struggled to counter them. The Mosquito was too fast for standard fighters at low altitude and too agile for heavy flak. German radar provided warning, but by the time fighters reached the target area, the Mosquitoes were already gone. Worse, from Germany's perspective, was the Mosquito's versatility. The same basic airframe served as reconnaissance aircraft, bomber, fighter, night fighter, coastal strike aircraft, and pathfinder. Production was dispersed across hundreds of small workshops that were nearly impossible to target effectively with strategic bombing. The wooden aircraft Britain's establishment had dismissed in 1939 was now one of the war's most effective combat aircraft. But the Mosquito's most audacious missions were still to come. February 18, 1944. RAF Hunsdon. Group Captain Percy Pickard received his orders at dawn. Operation Jericho. Strike Amiens prison in occupied France. Breach the walls. Allow French resistance prisoners to escape before the Gestapo executes them. The mission was impossibly precise. The prison walls were 3 feet thick. The bombs had to penetrate specific points to breach the walls without collapsing the entire structure on the prisoners inside. The guards' quarters had to be destroyed. The strike had to happen in daylight for accuracy. And the bombers had to escape before German fighters could intercept. Only the Mosquito could attempt it. Pickard assembled 18 Mosquito fighter bombers for the strike. They would attack in 3 waves. The first wave would breach the outer walls, the second would destroy the guards' quarters, the third would complete the breaches if needed. The formation took off at 11 a.m. and flew at low level across the English Channel to avoid radar detection. Over northern France, they descended to 50 feet, navigating by landmarks and speed calculations. German defenders never detected them until the Mosquitoes were already overhead. At 12:01 p.m., the first wave arrived over Amiens prison traveling at 280 miles per hour. The prison stood stark against snow-covered fields, its high walls clearly visible. Pickard lined up on the eastern wall and released his bombs from 50 feet. The 500-pounders struck the base of the wall precisely. The explosion blew a 30-foot breach. The second and third aircraft in the first wave breached the northern wall. The second wave destroyed the guards' quarters and the administration building, killing German personnel and SS officers inside. The third wave struck the prison's main buildings. Total attack time, 4 minutes. The Mosquitoes scattered immediately, flying different escape routes at maximum speed. German fighters scrambled but arrived too late. 158 prisoners escaped through the breached walls. Many were resistance fighters scheduled for execution that afternoon. Others were political prisoners who would not have survived interrogation. Group Captain Pickard's aircraft was shot down during the return flight. He and his navigator were killed. But Operation Jericho succeeded. The mission demonstrated the Mosquito's greatest strength, the ability to deliver precisely calculated violence with surgical accuracy. Heavy bombers would have destroyed the prison and killed everyone inside. Fighters lacked the payload to breach the walls. Only the Mosquito could execute the mission exactly as planned. That combination of speed, payload, and precision made it invaluable for missions requiring more than brute force. The Mosquito's speed and versatility extended beyond daylight precision bombing. In 1943, RAF Bomber Command faced a crisis. German night fighters were devastating Lancaster and Halifax bomber streams. Losses approached unsustainable levels. The Luftwaffe's night fighters, primarily the Bf-110 and Ju-88, used radar to locate British bombers in darkness, then closed for kills with upward-firing cannons. British bombers had no effective defense against these tactics. The solution came in metal and wood, powered by Merlin engines and equipped with radar, the Mosquito Night Fighter. The Night Fighter variant carried AIMK, for radar in its nose, for 20mm cannons under the fuselage, and a crew of 2. It was fast enough to catch any German aircraft and agile enough to outturn them in combat. By late 1943, Mosquito night fighters flew intruder missions over Germany, patrolling the areas where Luftwaffe night fighters hunted British bombers. The wooden aircraft now hunted the hunters. Wing Commander John "Bob" Braham, the RAF's top night fighter pilot, flew Mosquitoes on intruder missions throughout 1943 and 1944. His tactics were brutally effective: loiter near German night fighter bases, wait for enemy aircraft to take off or land, strike when they were most vulnerable. German night fighter pilots suddenly found themselves the prey. They were faster than the bombers, but the Mosquito was faster than them. They had cannon armament, but the Mosquito had equal firepower. They had radar, but Mosquito radar was superior. The hunter had become the hunted. Mosquito intruders devastated German night fighter operations. Luftwaffe pilots became reluctant to take off when British bomber streams approached, knowing Mosquitoes might be waiting. German night fighter losses increased while British bomber losses decreased. The psychological impact was profound. The Luftwaffe had dominated night combat since 1940. Now, even darkness provided no sanctuary from the wooden aircraft. By 1944, the Mosquito had proven itself in every role: reconnaissance, precision bombing, night fighting, coastal strikes. But perhaps its most strategically significant contribution was its use in nuisance raids that tied down German resources disproportionate to the forces committed. Small formations of Mosquitoes, sometimes just 2 or 3 aircraft, struck German cities nightly through 1944 and 1945. These weren't major bombing raids. They were harassment attacks designed to disrupt German war production, exhaust the population, and force Germany to maintain expensive air defenses across the entire country. The raids came without warning. German radar detected the approaching Mosquitoes, but the aircraft were gone before fighters could intercept. The bombs destroyed specific targets: power stations, railway junctions, factories, with precision heavy bombers couldn't match. Berlin experienced Mosquito raids almost nightly from January 1943 through April 1945. The attacks weren't devastating individually, but cumulatively they disrupted German administration, forced the government to disperse operations, and destroyed German morale. More importantly, the raids forced Germany to maintain fighter defenses and flak batteries across the entire Reich. Resources that could have reinforced the Eastern Front or defended against American daylight bombers were instead tied down defending against wooden aircraft that usually escaped without loss. The Mosquito's strategic value wasn't measured in tons of bombs dropped, but in German resources consumed defending against them. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended. The Mosquito had flown more operational missions than any British bomber except the Lancaster. It had served in every theater, filled every role, exceeded every expectation. Total production, 7,781 aircraft. The wooden aircraft that Britain's establishment had dismissed in 1938 had become one of the war's most effective combat aircraft. Geoffrey de Havilland's concept had been validated completely. Speed was better defense than armor. Wood was a viable structural material for high-performance aircraft. Simplified construction enabled mass production. Versatility mattered more than specialization. But the Mosquito's success came at a price few recognized. The aircraft was difficult to maintain in tropical climates where heat and humidity degraded the casein adhesives. The wooden structure required constant inspection for damage that wouldn't be visible on metal aircraft. And jet engines, which would dominate post-war aviation, needed metal airframes that could withstand higher temperatures and stresses. The Mosquito represented wood's final flowering in military aviation. After 1945, combat aircraft would be metal, then composites, but never again primarily wood. The last operational Mosquitoes flew in the early 1960s, relegated to training and target towing duties. Most were scrapped. Wood aircraft don't preserve well, they rot, they warp, they attract insects. Today, fewer than 30 complete Mosquitoes survive worldwide. But the aircraft's legacy extends beyond the survivors. The Mosquito proved that unconventional solutions could succeed when established doctrines failed. It demonstrated that speed and precision could be more effective than brute force. It showed that distributed production using non-strategic materials could outproduce centralized heavy industry. Most importantly, it validated the principle that skepticism should never prevent innovation. The experts had been wrong. The establishment had been wrong. The conventional wisdom had been wrong. Geoffrey de Havilland had been right. The wooden aircraft everyone had laughed at became the aircraft everyone feared. The bomber without guns became the bomber nobody could catch. The impossible design became one of World War II's most successful aircraft. And it all started with a madman's proposal that wooden aircraft could still win modern wars. They laughed at wooden planes. Until the Mosquito outflew them all.